Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for today's Lunch and Learn. I am Erin Creighton. I am the Adult Services Department Head and Assistant Branch Manager for the Fredericksburg branch of the Central Rappahannock Regional Library. Today, I am joined by Jon Bachman, who is a local historian and naturalist who's here to tell us about Aaron Anderson and his Medal of Honor. Jon, this was a story I'd never heard of before. I'm so excited to have you share this with everybody. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks a lot, Aaron. I appreciate the library giving me an opportunity to share this story. Yeah, Aaron Anderson, Medal of Honor. Okay, what does one think of? A couple of things that come to mind with me is that the Medal of Honor obviously is the highest military award for bravery in action. Okay, and I had never heard of this story either. Back in 2022, a friend of mine that I was working with on some programming at Stratford when I was at Stratford said, "Hey, have you ever heard of the story of the guy that won the Medal of Honor in Westmoreland County?" No, I've not. What is it? He says, "Well, I'm not sure." He says, I was at the barber shop and they were talking about stuff and they brought this guy up that had something about Maddox Creek. And if you're not familiar with Westmoreland County, Maddox Creek is pretty close to Colonial Beach. So if you know where Colonial Beach is, then you're pretty cool about where Maddox Creek is. And I had no idea. Well, I started researching this and it took me all the way to the Naval Historical Archives in Washington and all over the place to try to find out as much as I can about this incident. There's a lot of this story, and I'll be straight with you guys right away, has to be drawn from suppositions and thoughts. I mean, as you will see, Aaron was a former enslaved person, and there's pretty sparse documentation about many people who were families are looking for, or families of enslaved persons that it's just really hard to find the records. Anyway, I pulled this together and I hope you enjoy it. This is a story that a lot of people don't know about, and one I think is so important to tell because there are so many subplots sort of that are part of this. Okay, here we go. Aaron Anderson. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Next slide. During the month of February, we pay tribute to historical contributions made by African Americans. Throughout the history of the United States, racism and segregation were motivating factors for not properly recognizing worthy people for the merits they deserved. 26 African American soldiers and sailors earned the Medal of Honor during the American Civil War, including 8 sailors of the Union Navy, 15 soldiers of the United States colored troops, and 3 soldiers of other Army units. I want you to, as a viewer out there, and anybody that's looking at this, really pay attention to the pictures. I'll do the reading, but you look at the pictures and things like that as I read these. You don't need to read the words that I'm reading. It's just concentrate on these archival shots that probably you've never seen. Next slide. On the eve of the Civil War, the enslaved population reached its peak of nearly 4 million people. By 1860, on the eve of the U.S. Civil War, an African American had a nearly 90% chance of being enslaved. One historian estimates that successful escapes represented about 1 to 3% of the total enslaved population. And quite honestly, I think that's giving it a lot of credit. I know that I tried to figure out how many total enslaved people might have tried to escape slavery in those states that had it. I came up with about 100,000, but I think that's pretty high too. So it was a rare event. Next slide. In 1865, okay, Aaron Anderson became one of a handful of formerly enslaved African-American Civil War-era soldiers and sailors to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. His photograph, I could not find a photograph of him. Those individuals that you see on the screen did receive the Medal of Honor. It is speculated that Aaron Anderson was born enslaved on a plantation near Plymouth, Washington County, North Carolina in 1811. Washington County is a flat, low-lying coastal landscape dominated by the Roanoke River. Along the Roanoke River, plantations were considered some of the finest in the East, with cotton being a major cash crop during the antebellum years. Decades of experience may have allowed Aaron to build up a deep knowledge of the local landscape, identify sympathetic neighbors, both black and white, and understand the timing of a safe travel. And all this will come together here as we talk about the story. If Aaron was, in fact, born in 1811, he would have been 51 years old when Plymouth was captured by the federal forces. Approximately 15% of the enslaved population at the time was over the age of 40, only 15%. And in 1860, only about 3.5% of the African-American population, or the enslaved population, would ever live beyond the age of 60, and for obvious reasons that I think most of you could kind of figure out. So what might explain an enslaved person living to 51? What occupations on a plantation might ensure a longer life? And before we go on, that you may be wondering, what's up here with this 51-year-old person? And so 51 years old is a long time to live in pre-Civil War South and America, and even more so if you were African American. We know that this guy, Aaron Anderson, as you will see, enlisted at the age of 51. Enlisted in the Navy, but that's coming. Next slide. From extremely limited mentionings regarding Aaron Anderson, we know that he enlisted in the Federal Navy on April 17th, 1863. We know that. Noted on his enlistment documents are his occupations before enlisting in the Navy. Aaron worked as a cook in Philadelphia. It is reasonable to suppose Aaron may have been a cook or a chef on his former plantation. Okay, this valuable skill may explain his personal longevity. Okay, 51-year-old guy. Aaron may have been a chef on a large plantation. Okay. Chefs enjoyed unique liberties. Some were permitted to hire themselves out during their time off and keep a portion of their earnings. Some chefs were granted permission to travel outside the plantation to shop at marketplaces or gather game. Despite these relative advantages, though, these liberties were entirely dependent on the whim of the enslaver and did not change their legal status as property. If Aaron was enslaved at one of the large plantations, he would have been approximately 25 miles from Plymouth, North Carolina. With local knowledge, food-wise insights, and the ability to travel, Aaron may have decided the time was right to escape. Again, he's 51 years old. We know that this guy lived. He enlisted in the Navy. So we're kind of doing a backward analysis of the probable background of this fella, Aaron Anderson. Next slide. Well, in September of 1861, Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles had authorized the enlistment of formerly enslaved people, often called contrabands. So the Secretary of the Navy says it's okay for enslaved people to be enlisted. All right, next slide. In January of 1862, here's a name familiar to people in Fredericksburg because of the Battle of Fredericksburg, General Ambrose E. Burnside arrived at Hatteras Inlet with a Union fleet intending to sweep through and secure the rivers and sounds of North Carolina. On February 5th, he headed north up the Sound to attack Roanoke Island. By controlling the Roanoke River, the Union could effectively isolate Plymouth, depriving the Confederacy of a port for blockade runners. And you'll recall your Civil War history that this was part of the huge Union plan that was called the Anaconda Plan, where they would squeeze the Confederacy by blocking the Atlantic and coastal ports and controlling the rivers and things like that, kind of just crunching it together and slowly preventing the Confederacy from, trade and picking up supplies and things like that. Next slide. After the Union won the Battle of Roanoke Island in February of 62, word quickly spread throughout the plantation network that the Union Army would protect those who reached their lines. Very important. Plymouth, North Carolina became a prime area location for freedom seekers. And by 1862, records indicate 10,000 contrabands had converged on the North Carolina coast. 10,000, all in effect running away from their enslavement and gathering where the federal forces would protect them. Next slide. Aaron, may have joined the thousands fleeing enslavement to Plymouth, North Carolina. Anderson may have been one of those contrabands. That is a picture of a group of contrabands. I don't know if they're from Plymouth, North Carolina, but that would be a picture that you could, that those are the people that escaped slavery and would end up being protected by the Union forces on these coastal towns. Next slide. Well, these refugee camps provided a rich source of Union Army and Navy recruiting opportunities, giving Aaron a plan to become employed. The U.S. Navy and U.S. Army maintained starkly different policies toward African Americans during the Civil War. While the Army initially barred black men from service entirely under the Militia Act of 1792, the Navy never officially barred them, though it did impose pre-war quotas. The federal government prioritized the Army, offering cash bounties of $100 for soldiers while often failing to provide similar incentives or quotas for the Navy. By the end of 1862, the Federal Navy had grown from roughly 90 vessels at the start of the war to nearly 400, creating an urgent need for thousands of new sailors. Aaron must have made his way to Philadelphia. and before April 17th, 1863. That's the day he enlisted in Philadelphia under the name Aaron Anderson, enlisting at the lowest naval rank, the bottom rung. It was called landsman. He was a landsman. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, landsman or landman was a formal naval rating. This was a formal rating for a person enlisting, assigned to new recruits with little or no maritime experience. Essentially, they were sailors who had lived their entire lives on land and were just beginning the journey at sea. Aaron was assigned after he enlisted. We know this. Well, there's nothing like military records. They're very precise. Anderson was assigned to the Potomac flotilla, specifically the USS Wyandank, a wooden-hulled side-wheel ferry boat built in 1847, acquired by the Union Navy on September 12th, 1861. There it is. That's it. Not much to look at there. The Wyandank was used during the Civil War as a stores ship for the Potomac flotilla. That picture shows you pretty much exactly the whole nature of the support staffs necessary for ships. I mean, they had to have, it wasn't just the ship, they had to have dozens of support facilities and ships to accommodate the needs of the sailors. So that's a great shot there of what 1862 naval setting was. Well, the Potomac flotilla was created in the early days of the American Civil War to secure Union communications in the Chesapeake Bay, okay, the Potomac River, all right, and their tributaries, basically to disrupt any communications and shipping and the blockade, to block the Potomac River from access by the Confederates. This was another key strategy by the Union naval and military individuals. Next. All right, this is located. Now, I know that many of you don't know where this is, but this is Maddox Creek. That is, you can see it there, emptying into the Chesapeake Bay. On March 17th, less than a month before the end of the Civil War, Anderson was part of a mission to attack Confederate forces in Maddox Creek, a tributary of the Potomac in Westmoreland County, Virginia. Now, when I say that he was part of a mission, remember his status. He's a landsman, the bottom rung. Basically, he's going to be manning an oar and rowing the, quite honestly, the white Union sailors to various strategic points along Maddox Creek so they could rout out the Confederates. Next slide. And this shows you pretty much where the Confederate troops were operating from. This is, and it's just my surmise, but I think based on what I've researched, this is where they carried out their supply base. So that's the target right there. Next slide. Okay, well, several Union ships, including the Wyandank, the Stepping Stones, and the Dawn, were on routine patrol to blockade this supply route. Oh, well, they ran into the Confederates and a battle broke out in March of 1865, and several of the ships were sunk. That's an aerial shot of the mouth of Maddox Creek as it empties into the Chesapeake Bay, an early lithograph of the action that apparently broke out on that day in March of 1865. Well, a launch was equipped. Remember, they got to get to the supply base. A launch equipped with a Dahlgren boat howitzer launched from the Don. Now, these pictures are pretty very accurate. That first of all shows the lower left, shows you what these launches look like. And they were rowed. They may have an emergency sail or something, but basically they were rowed around with oars. That's the Dahlgren gun, okay, that was mounted on the front of this launch. Okay, and that's where Aaron's going to be. Next slide. Well, a group of 70 men were sent to follow along the riverbank. So they put him ashore where that arrow indicates, on foot. Okay. Anderson and the others, black landsmen, worked the oars on the boat. Now, they were not dispensed to the riverbank. Remember, they're on the boat. Okay. With the gun. Follow the arrows. I'm going to read top to bottom. As the boat and the accompanying foot soldiers made their way up the creek's right fork, the bottom, the foot soldiers came under sporadic fire from snipers, Confederate snipers. Upon finding 4 small boats that had been abandoned by the Confederates, they quickly destroyed them. Meanwhile, Anderson, right, and boatswain's mate Patrick Mullen and other oarsmen rowed back down the creek and then up the left side, up the left fork, the top fork. Without a supporting land force, right, there was nobody on that side that could protect them. Remember, the other Union troops were walking along the bottom there. And Aaron and the guys in the boat are at the top. And so without supporting land force, meaning guys to help them out, the boat was vulnerable to attack from the Confederates. You're like, hello. On the riverbanks. So they were getting shot at. And the deeper water of the left fork also meant that they might encounter larger ships with more armament. So this is a pretty dangerous place. Remember, they're on the opposite side of where all the Union troops were dropped off on, the right side of the bottom. Next slide. Half of the boat oars and a musket were destroyed by gunfire, puncturing the hull of the boat Anderson was in. So the Confederates are blazing away at this wooden boat with Anderson in it, and we know he's in it. But they're trying to provide cover for the escape of those guys on the bottom. Remember, they were dropped off at the bottom to flush out the Confederates. Well, now Aaron and that little boat are sitting in the middle of Maddox Creek getting pummeled by the Confederate snipers literally on both sides. As Anderson and the other men who still had oars continued to row downstream. Now, downstream means toward the Chesapeake Bay. The rest of the oarsmen bailed water, while Mullen fired the howitzer at the soldiers on the shore. So you can see that they're getting shot at them from different angles. Mullen and Anderson apparently are doing the best they can to hold off the gunfire from the Confederate positions and allow the Union troops on the bottom there to escape. Well, they successfully escaped from the Confederate force. Yeah. And although the boat was badly damaged, the one that Aaron was in, the only casualty was a landsman slightly wounded. Not bad. Okay, so they're fighting their way. Despite the damage, Anderson and the other oarsmen successfully rowed the boat to safety, enabling the crew to destroy 3 enemy schooners. And he was awarded the Medal of Honor on June 22nd, 1865. Next slide. Summers is the guy that's in charge of the Wyandank. Summers singled out Anderson, singled him out, and this guy Mullen for their actions during the skirmish. And both of them were awarded the Medal of Honor on June 22nd, 1865. Anderson's award was issued under the name Aaron Sanderson. The misspelling which had been entered into the Wyandank's log. Nice going. Mullen earned a second Medal of Honor less than 2 months. Imagine two Medals of Honor. Medal of Honor less than 2 months after the Maddox Creek expedition, making him one of only 19 two-time recipients in American history. So that's how serious this was. So here's the official citation. Aaron Anderson served on board the USS Wyandank during a boat expedition up Maddox Creek, 17 March 1865. Participating with a boat crew in the clearing of Maddox Creek, landsman Sanderson, there you go, carried out his duties courageously in the face of devastating fire, which cut away half the oars. Half the oars. And that was a pretty good sized ship. They must have had about a couple of dozen oars, pierced the launch in many places, and cut the barrel off a musket being fired at the enemy. So this was very, very intense. While specific day-to-day muster out logs for every individual sailor are not always digitized, records indicate that Aaron left the Navy in 1865, following the end of his enlistment and the conclusion of the war. At the time of his service, the Wyandank was primarily stationed there up there in that picture, at the top picture above the Wyandank, primarily stationed at a place called St. Inigo's Creek, Maryland. Okay, after leaving the Navy, very little is known of Aaron's post-war life. However, census records indicate Aaron Anderson, remember they kept messing up his name, indicate he returned to Philadelphia and lived and worked in South Philadelphia at various jobs as laborer, cook, whitewasher, and coachman. And that's the picture of his house there, I believe, because I did some research in that area looking for where it was. You can see the little map there. And Aaron Sanderson, remember they kept screwing his name up, described as a black male widower, okay, born North Carolina, age 70, right, worked as a calciminer. That's another term for a whitewasher. Whitewash is a lime paint, Lime, lime paint. It's considered the cheapest paint that you can get. And whitewash was put on it was inexpensive paint. And he resided, Aaron, at 1357 Cater Street in the South. Now that's a picture of a house at 1357 Cater Street in the South. That may have been his house. Pretty sure it was. Anderson died on January 9th, 1886 of heart disease and was buried a few days later in Lebanon Cemetery. Well, Lebanon Cemetery was an all-black cemetery. Remember, this was segregation. So whites and black were not even buried together. The Lebanon Cemetery had a soldier's lot specifically reserved for veterans of the Civil War. So that's a black church. He's buried there, 1886. Aaron Anderson Sanderson, it's him. He's buried there in the soldier's lot. Okay. You are not now. Could you go back a couple? Okay, let's see. Go forward. You are not judged by the height that you have written, but the depth that you have climbed. Now, Anderson, remember, I know that a lot of this story was pieced together but I feel confident that most of the story is accurate. I believe this guy did live in Plymouth, outside of Plymouth, North Carolina. I know that and Aaron Anderson Sanderson did enlist. He was 51 when he got to Philadelphia. I think this story is legit. Aaron Anderson, one of only a handful of African Americans ever to receive the Medal of Honor, received it for the action at Maddox Creek, right up the road from us in Westmoreland County.
What a wonderful story. I just realized I was muted. What a wonderful story to share during the 250th. People
Yeah.
to get the Medal of Honor and to, you know, I mean, it is a great, you and I had talked about this before we went on air about how this would be a great story for February, but it's such an amazing story just about Americana.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Aaron, like, you know, climbing out from where he was and serving his country and how
Yeah, I mean, here's a guy that was probably a chef on a big plantation who knew, because that this place Plymouth was being overrun by the Federals, right? And if you wanted to get out, now is the time to get out.
Smart
and
dude.
He got out and got to Plymouth. Again, there are so many little holes in the story. It's very, I mean, it's not straight A to B to C to D to E.
Exactly. We have to make some guesses, but I think your suppositions were right on track, honestly, John. And what I also really appreciated was you had mentioned about the lifespan. I had looked this up too because I was really curious to see, like, in general, the lifespan in the 1860s was in the 40s for even like, you know, for everybody.
That's for the average.
Worse, but for the average, it was in the 40s.
That's right.
And, so for Aaron to live into his 70s, to serve his country with valor, and then to live into his 70s was just amazing.
It is a true. Now, you know, the thing that gets me is like, okay, enslavement for a lifetime, what it does to you, what it means to you every day, and only to keep this idea of escape and freedom alive. So that, because let's face it, and I've done research on a number of other enslaved people from the Northern Neck. I've done a number of articles and things like that on the lives of these people. I mean, come on. Most of the people would never consider doing this.
The bravery that he portrayed by being able to leave that situation and then to decide to stand up for everybody else's rights and to join the Navy. Just such an amazing guy. We are over our time. I have to end this, but thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, please don't apologize. This was a fascinating program. I hope everybody who's watching it enjoys this. Thank you so much, and I hope you find other ways to celebrate the 250th.
That's right.
Thank you, John.